Good morning, everybody, and welcome our witnesses and to the Oversight and Investigation Committee. Today's Subcommittee on Oversight and Investigation will review challenges to safety, security, and taxpayer stewardship in the Department of Energy's nuclear weapon complex. DOE is responsible for securing and maintaining the most dangerous materials on the planet, including nuclear warheads. This is one area that must have effective oversight. This committee, principally through the work of this subcommittee, has a long history of bipartisan scrutiny of the Department of Energy's oversight and management of the contractors that are charged with running DOE's nuclear weapons program and operations. And the lessons from our committee's past investigations and related GAO, Inspector General, DOE's oversight report should guide our bipartisan review of the current situation. My colleagues, chief among these lessons is that independent and effective oversight is simply essential and necessary. The safety and security risks involved in overseeing the nation's nuclear facilities are enormous, and this committee must be vigilant about maintaining the exhaustive oversight that the committee has traditionally had in this area. DOE, through its National Nuclear Security Administration, or NNSA, manages programs that involve high-hazard nuclear facilities and materials, the most sensitive national security information, and complex construction and environmental cleanup operations that pose substantial safety, public health, and environmental risk. Interestingly, all of these programs are carried out by contractors, both at the National Lab and at DOE's weapon production facilities. These contractors and their federal managers, spending billions of taxpayers' dollars on dangerous nuclear projects, require rigorous oversight. Today we will review what DOE has done in recent years to reform its oversight and program management. I welcome our witnesses from DOE, the DOE Inspector General, and the GAO, who will help us in examining this important issue. When government vigilance is not sufficiently rigorous, problems obviously occur. A case in point is a recent security failure at the Y-12 National Security Site in Oak Ridge, Tennessee this past July. By all accounts, contractors and site managers' failures at Y-12 allowed one of the most serious security breakdowns in the history of the weapons complex. But Y-12 is but the latest in a string of failures. Over the past decade, we have seen security breaches and management failures at Los Alamos National Laboratory in New Mexico. GAO testimony will remind us all of over one five-year period after 9/11 in which 57 security incidents occurred, more than half of which involved the confirmed or suspected release of data that posed the most serious rating of threat to the United States security interests. In another example, investigated by this subcommittee in 2008, the Lawrence Livermore National Lab gave itself passing mark on its own physical security, and the NNSA federal on-site managers gave it a passing mark too. Only when DOE's Office of Independent Oversight actually tested the security independently was it evident that the lab deserved the lowest possible rating for protective force performance and for physical protection of classified materials. On the safety front, the experience has been no better. From 2007 to 2010, the Lawrence Livermore Lab had multiple events involving uncontrolled worker exposure to beryllium, which can cause a debilitating and sometimes fatal lung condition. During this period, the lab determined it was compliant with DOE's safety regulations. It took an independent department oversight review to determine that the contractor's program violated the regulations. Now, this past May, the DOE Inspector General reported that Sandia National Laboratories had not held its line managers accountable for implementing an important system for preventing and reducing injuries. Neither the contractor nor the federal site manager had addressed problems that had been identified in this program for more than a decade. For more than 20 years, GAO has designated DOE contract management oversight relating to the weapons complex as high risk for fraud, waste, abuse, and mismanagement. We have seen examples of this multi-billion-dollar cost increases and schedule delays in important NNSA construction projects. In the meantime, directors of the National Laboratory and others claim that federal oversight is too burdensome and intrusive, and that DOE should back off and let the contractors operate as they see fit. Our friends at the Armed Services Committee have moved legislation through the House that would dramatically limit DOE's ability to conduct independent internal oversight over its program management and the contractors. I recognize that NNSA has not been delivering all that is expected of it, but this committee, given its jurisdictional and long-time policy interest in effective DOE management, has to diagnose the problems for itself independently. We need to examine the facts, follow the evidence, identify what works and what doesn't work, and identify a clear path to ensuring safe, secure operations in the interest of taxpayers and, of course, on national security. With that, I recognize the ranking member, Mr. Gett.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to echo the Chairman's remarks about this subcommittee having a long bipartisan history of asking tough questions about the safety and security of our nation's nuclear facilities. I'm really pleased we're continuing this work today. I'm glad that members of this subcommittee have the chance to develop a greater understanding of how NNSA is doing at securing our nuclear facilities and to learn what can be done to improve the safety and security of those who live or work near those facilities. I've been on this committee for almost 16 years now, and since that time, we've had almost over 20 hearings on nuclear issues at our national labs. In fact, many of the witnesses here today are regulars in front of this committee. I know the importance of safe and secure nuclear facilities, and I know what's at stake when something falls through the cracks or when the contractors at the sites aren't being carefully watched. About 10 years ago, this subcommittee began the first of a series of hearings on shocking security issues at Los Alamos National Laboratory in New Mexico. Chairman Barton will remember the trip that we took there to look at that facility and to see the shocking lapses that we saw. What we covered were serious, pervasive issues with the management culture and the security and safety of the site. We attacked those problems head-on, demanding answers and forcing NNSA and DOE to work harder to secure their facilities. And as a result, the agency implemented new security procedures and increased oversight of the labs. But obviously, NNSA has more work to do, and frankly, this committee has more oversight work to do. In recent weeks, we've seen new safety and security issues arise at 2 locations in the nation's nuclear weapons complex. Late last month, the Los Alamos lab informed the public that they were investigating an inadvertent spread of a radioactive material, technetium-99, by employees and contractors at Los Alamos. While DOE indicated that there was no danger of public contamination, approximately a dozen people were exposed, with some tracking of the radioactive material off-site. This safety lapse comes on the heels of a bizarre but very serious security breach at the Y-12 uranium facility, where an 82-year-old nun, and 2 others were able to breach the secure perimeter and vandalize a supposedly secure building containing dangerous nuclear material. These safety and security incidents show very clearly the need for strong and robust oversight from this committee and others of security issues at our nuclear facilities. In 2004 and 2005, our willingness to bring serious nuclear safety issues into the public view and to demand that DOE and its labs be held accountable for their actions made a significant difference. DOE is better than it used to be. There's an entire office dedicated to the health, safety, and security of all DOE facilities, but recent events tell us there's more serious work left to be done. Mr. Chairman, that's why it's absolutely necessary for DOE and others to maintain a strong oversight role over NNSA facilities. From this committee to the DOE Office of Health, Safety, and Security, to the Inspector General, to GAO, to the Defense Nuclear Facility Safety Board, to other outside organizations, strong independent oversight from agencies and groups forces NNSA to take better care of our nuclear facilities. Without good oversight, serious issues won't be identified and fixed, and the results could be disastrous. I can't think of any reason we would want to decrease our oversight of these facilities, inhibit the ability of oversight to review site actions, or reduce accountability for those responsible for keeping nuclear sites safe. At a time when terrorists and hostile nations have an ever-increasing pool of physical and cyber weapons in their arsenals, we need to constantly adapt and focus our efforts to protect nuclear facilities. I hope that this hearing will provide us with the information that our colleagues on both sides of the aisle need, so we can come together to improve the safety and security of these nuclear facilities. There have just been too many close calls to ignore. Constant vigilance is required. When it comes to our nation's nuclear facilities, there can never be enough oversight. And that, Mr. Chairman, is why I appreciate you holding this hearing today, and I yield back.
I thank my colleague, and I recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Barton, for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When an 82-year-old pacifist nun gets to the inner sanctum of our weapons complex, you cannot say, "Job well done." She's in the audience. Would you please stand up, ma'am? We want to thank you for pointing out some of the problems in our security. While I don't totally agree with your platform that you were espousing, I do thank you for bringing out the inadequacies of our security system, and thank you for being here today. Mr. Chairman, that young lady there brought a Holy Bible. If she had been a terrorist, the Lord only knows what could have happened. We have had numerous hearings in this subcommittee and full committee on security at our national laboratories and especially our weapons complexes. Apparently that message has still not gone forward about what needs to be done. What doesn't need to be done, though, is just give the contractors an attaboy and a pat on the back. If there's ever a time for more aggressive oversight, this is it, and I applaud you and the ranking subcommittee member, Ms. DeGette, for doing that today. And with that, I yield to Mr. Terry the balance of my time.
The gentlelady can sit down if she likes.
No, ma'am.
Well, I have to congratulate the contractors of NNSA for accomplishing something based upon their mind-boggling incompetence that hasn't happened here in a while, and that's uniting Republicans and Democrats. In our desire for change and reform and more oversight, the security of U.S. nuclear weapons stockpile cannot be overstated. NNSA was created to keep the DOE from being overstretched, yet it appears that all of their duties were left with contractors where little oversight could or would be done. The last 5 years has seen a significant deterioration in security at the complex as a result of a decrease in how contractors interact with federal officials. There must be an understanding that the taxpayer owns these complexes and they have not gotten their money's worth. Failures in both the safety of the laboratories and protection of the weapons themselves has been repeated across the complex, and I believe there is bipartisan support for more oversight. The unprecedented breakdown at Y-12 acted as a test of our security system and appears to be an all-out failure. I struggle to understand how the gentlelady that was introduced, an 82-year-old nun, can get through the Fort Knox of nuclear weapons facilities, and what does that say for the complex as a whole? A major concern of the Y-12 breakdown is the disunity between maintenance and operation contractor and the security personnel. When cameras had been inoperable for 6 months, this tells me that even the most basic level, there is no communication within the facility, no oversight, and I understand there's a point where too much oversight can become inefficient and hinder progress in nuclear testing. I believe that we are ultimately here today to do is find a balance where citizens can be certain that the nuclear material is secure and scientists continue to work in their most efficient manner. That's what we're here to do today. Hopefully we can find that balance, and I'll yield to the gentlelady from Tennessee.
I thank the gentleman and I thank the chairman for the hearing, and indeed there has been a lot of emphasis and a lot of focus on the July 28th, 2012 incident that occurred at the Y-12 facility and the security complex there. And the nun who has stood and been recognized, and two other anti-nuclear activists cut through that fence, got into through the perimeter. They did this seeming to not be noticed. Despite setting off multiple alarms, a delayed response by WSI security personnel gave these protesters time to hang banners, splash blood and paint messages on the facility that contains over 100 tons of weapons-grade, highly enriched uranium. We are appalled. We are appalled. WSI's slow response, lack of regard for security protocols, along with their check-the-box mentality, is completely unacceptable, especially when you take into account the sensitive material they are paid to protect against potential terrorists and nation-states capable of using deadly force during a security breach. While I understand that security changes have now been made at the Y-12 facility since the incident to ensure that it never happens again, we need to seriously review classified DOE reports from 2010 that the Washington Post reported on this morning, where investigators found, and I'm quoting, security cameras were inoperable, equipment maintenance was sloppy, and guards were poorly trained. And you knew this 2 years ago? 2 years ago? These criticisms are the very same ones that may have led to the July 28th security breach. Mr. Chairman, the incident demonstrates the great importance of the hearing today. I fully believe it is important for the committee to review the entire working relationship between the NNSA, DOE, and the security contractors across the country at all of our nuclear weapons complexes. I yield back.
Lady's time has expired. The gentleman from California, Mr. Waxman, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is one of those hearings that we occasionally have in Congress where we say together, Democrats and Republicans, we're shocked. We're shocked that something like this could happen. But we then blame others and don't accept responsibility for ourselves. We have oversight jurisdiction in this committee to be sure this sort of thing doesn't happen. And we know DOE has oversight responsibility. And we expect them to do their job. And you would think that reasonable people would understand that this is a high priority for this country. This is a wake-up call, if there ever was one. This is a quote from the New York Times. With flashlights and bolt cutters, the three pacifists defied barbed wire as well as armed guards, video cameras, and motion sensors, end quote. Well, this security lapse is incredible. We have to do everything in our power to ensure that no one else breaches our security, and particularly that none of our enemies view this as an opening, that will show that this is a weakness that they can exploit. Well, given this wake-up call, you would think members of Congress or any reasonable person would suggest that rolling back security and safety requirements at the nuclear safety, the NNSA facilities, or promoting reducing oversight of these facilities would be outrageous. They wouldn't think of such a thing. Yet that's what the Republican Congress did. We had a National Defense Authorization Act, H.R. 4310. It passed the House in May. And that bill weakens protection for our nuclear laboratories and facilities. The bill lowered standards at NNSA sites, and they limited the ability of the Department of Energy and the Defense Nuclear Facilities Safety Board to address concerns and propose solutions to these problems. Well, we went along with that, our committee leadership, in the authorization bill to lower our oversight for these kinds of breaches. This effort to weaken oversight of nuclear facilities makes absolutely no sense, and this issue, that most recently, of our guest today, an 82-year-old nun breaching the security at the sensitive Oak Ridge nuclear facility and splashing blood on a building that holds enriched uranium before she was arrested, illustrates why we need more oversight and more activity to stop it, not less. Sometimes I think that people are so anxious to save money that they cut off their nose to save their face. We need oversight. We need to spend the money to do this. And all those people who've been telling us we can't afford this and we can't afford that because we got to give more tax breaks to the upper income ought to think through whether that point of view makes sense. We need multiple layers of strong oversight at our nuclear facilities. We can't simply assume that NNSA and its contractors are making appropriate security and safety decisions. That reminds me of Hurricane Katrina. Good job, great job, Brownie, as President Bush said to his appointee who knew nothing about emergency preparedness. He was put in his job because he was a gold crony of the president at that time. The ability of DOE, this committee, and other oversight experts to ask the tough questions is absolutely vital to holding labs and facilities accountable. We cannot leave nuclear facilities exposed to national disasters or threats from hostile enemies. We have to make sure that those who manage nuclear materials are putting safety and security first. Now, we're lucky that it was just this very nice nun and others who came to express their point of view that gained access to a secure area next to highly enriched uranium facilities. It could have been much worse. We can all view this as a warning call. We have to look closely at our nuclear facilities, make sure they are strong. There are strong, effective oversight mechanisms in place to protect them from danger. We cannot remove or repeal the protections that already are in place. Mr. Chairman, there are some things we don't agree on, but I think we can all agree that strong oversight of our nuclear arsenal and our nuclear facilities and laboratories is an absolute necessity, and it's time for Congress not just to hold a hearing and say, oh my gosh, what happened, but to realize that when we make cuts to this exact kind of surveillance, we are going to end up paying the consequences for it. Happily, the consequences were not as severe as they might have been, but let this be a warning call to all of us. Yield back, my friend.
Gentleman yields back, and I just say to the gentleman, this full committee always puts safety and security first when we're dealing with this very important issue, and it's always been bipartisan. With that, let me welcome our witnesses here this morning. And we have the Honorable Daniel B. Poneman, Deputy Secretary, U.S. Department of Energy, the Honorable Thomas P. D. D'Agostino, Undersecretary for Nuclear Security and Administrator, National Nuclear Security Administration, U.S. Department of Energy, Mr. Glenn S. Pondonsky, Chief Health, Safety, and Security Officer, the Department of Energy, the Honorable Gregory H. Friedman, Inspector General, Department of Energy, and Mark E. Graffican, Managing Director, National Resources Environmental Team, Government Accountability Office. As you know, folks, the testimony you're about to give is subject to Title 18, Section 1001 of the United States Code. When holding an investigative hearing like this committee has a practice of taking testimony under oath. Do any of you object to testifying under oath? No? Okay. The chair then advises you that under the rules of the House and the rules of the committee, you are entitled to be advised by counsel. Do you desire to be advised by counsel during your testimony today? No? In that case, you please rise and raise your right hand. Do you swear the testimony that you're about to give is the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God? All right, and with that, we welcome you again, and you each will give you your 5-minute summary. Mr. Poneman, we're going to start with you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and in the interest of time, I would request that my full statement be submitted
By
for
unanimous
record.
consent, so ordered.
Thank you, sir. Chairman Stearns, Ranking Member DeGette, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the invitation to appear before you today to discuss the Department of Energy's oversight of the nuclear weapons complex and the recent security incident at the Y-12 National Security Complex. We appreciate the interest and engagement of this committee and recognize the important oversight role that you fulfill.
Okay.
We also share the committee's commitment to assure that all of our offices and operations are delivering on our mission safely, securely, and in a fiscally responsible manner. Since its creation in 1999, the National Nuclear Security Administration has served as a separately organized entity within the U.S. Department of Energy, entrusted with the execution of our nuclear security missions. Living up to the challenging demands of executing our mission safely, securely, and in a fiscally responsible manner requires daily management through strong, effective, and efficient relationships with our management and operating contractors, congressional oversight, in conjunction with oversight by the DOE Office of Health, Safety, and Security, our internal independent oversight body, as well as that of the DOE Inspector General, the Defense Nuclear Facilities Safety Board, and the Government Accountability Office contribute to the safety and security of DOE facilities. As the recent incident at Y-12 demonstrates, the Department has at times fallen short of our own expectations and faces continuing challenges in our goal of continuous improvement. This recent incident, as the Secretary has made abundantly clear, is unacceptable, and we have taken and will continue to take steps not only to identify and correct issues at Y-12, but across the DOE complex. In response to this incident, we acted swiftly to identify and address the problems that it revealed. These actions, either directly or through the contract for the site, included the following immediate steps to improve security. In the realm of physical protection, cameras have been repaired and tested, guard patrols increased, security policies have been strengthened, and all personnel have been retrained on security procedures. The number of false and nuisance alarms have been greatly reduced to provide more confidence in the intrusion detection system. In terms of the professional force on site, nuclear operations at the site were suspended until retraining and other modifications mentioned above were completed. The entire site workforce was required to undergo additional security training. The former head of security from our Pantex facility moved to Y-12 to lead the effort to reform the security culture at the site. The Department's Chief of Health, Safety, and Security was directed to deploy a team to Y-12 for an independent inspection. Site managers at all DOE facilities with nuclear material were directed to provide their written assurance that all nuclear facilities are in full compliance with Department security policies and directives, as well as internal policies established at the site level. Security functions at the Y-12 site itself have been brought into the management and operations contract to ensure continuity of operations and moving toward an integrated model moving forward. In the area of leadership changes, the plant manager and chief operating officer at the site retired 12 days after the incident. 6 of the top contractor executives responsible for security at the Y-12 site have been removed. The leadership of the guard force has been removed, and the guards involved in this incident have been removed or reassigned. The chief of defense nuclear security for the National Nuclear Security Administration has been reassigned pending the outcome of our internal reviews, and a formal show cause letter was issued to the contractor that covers the entire scope of operations at Y-12, including security. This is the first step toward potentially terminating the contracts for both the site contractor and its security subcontractor. Past performance, including deficiencies and terminations, would be considered in the awarding of any future contracts. In the area of reviews, the HSS organization that Mr. Podonsky leads was directed to lead near-term assessments of all Category 1 nuclear material sites to identify any systemic issues, enhancing independent oversight performance testing program to incorporate no-notice or short-notice security testing, and conducting comprehensive independent oversight security inspections at all Category 1 sites over the next 12 months using the enhanced program of performance testing. And an assessment was initiated, led by Brigadier General Sandra Finnan, to review the oversight model itself and the security organizational structure at NNSA headquarters that some of the members have already commented in their opening remarks. The series of personnel and management changes that I have just briefly outlined were made to provide the highest level of security at the site and across the DOE complex. To manage this transition, we have brought some of the best security experts from our enterprise to Y-12 to act quickly to redress the security shortcomings at that site. We are also working to make the structural and cultural changes required to appropriately secure this facility. The Secretary and I intend to send a clear message. Lapses in security will not be tolerated. We will leave no stone unturned to find out what went wrong, and we will take the steps necessary to provide effective security at this site and across our enterprise. Mr. Chairman and distinguished members of this committee, safety and security are integral to the Department's mission. DOE embraces its obligation to protect the public, the workers, and the environment. We continuously strive to improve upon our safety and security standards and the policies that guide our operations, and we hold line management and ourselves accountable. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss this vital mission. I look forward to answering your questions both here and in a classified setting as appropriate.
Thank you, gentlemen. Mr. Gaffigan, your opening statement.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Freeman.
Ranking Member DeGette, members of the subcommittee, good morning. I'm pleased to be here to discuss safety, security, and project management. Sorry. Does that work for you a little better? Okay. I'm pleased to be here to discuss safety, security, and project management oversight of the nuclear security enterprise. In summary, in each of these areas, I'd like to briefly discuss some of the challenges, the current status and progress in these areas, and some potential paths forward. Regarding safety, let me start by noting that, thankfully, through the efforts of DOE, NNSA, and its contractors, the stockpile has remained safe and reliable. However, safety problems do occur, and we have identified them in the past. We have attempted to find the contributing factors to these problems and note that they fall into three key areas: lax attitudes towards safety procedures, inconsistent and unsustained corrective actions, and inadequate oversight. Currently, DOE has instituted a safety reform effort to review opportunities to streamline requirements and eliminate directives that do not add value to safety. While we applaud DOE's efforts to improve safety requirements, going forward, we believe that DOE can make a stronger case in safety reform by ensuring that changes are based on sound analysis of the benefits and costs with good measures of their success. In addition, future efforts should strive to address areas of concern in quality assurance, safety culture, and independent federal oversight. Regarding security, our work in the past has sought to understand past failures that have led to security incidents that have posed the most serious threat to national security and led to shutdowns at facilities like Los Alamos and Lawrence Livermore. Both GAO and the DOE IG have identified common themes that led to these problems, including an over-reliance on contractor assurance and corrective actions that are not sustained. As with safety, DOE has instituted a security reform effort to ensure effective, streamlined, and efficient security without excessive federal oversight. While there may be opportunities for more efficient security policy and oversight, our past work has shown that excessive federal oversight is not the problem. As demonstrated by the July incident at Y-12, the recent IG report cites an all-too-familiar finding that contractor governance and federal oversight failed to identify and correct early indicators of multiple system breakdowns that allowed the security breach. While DOE and NNSA are undertaking many actions in response to this incident, the real challenge going forward is to sustain the security improvements that will invariably be made at NNSA sites. This will require leadership, improved contractor assurance systems, and strong independent federal oversight. Lastly, regarding project management, NNSA continues to experience significant cost and schedule overruns on its major construction projects. To name a few, the National Ignition Facility at Lawrence Livermore, a $2.1 billion original estimate, grew to $3.5 billion and was 7 years behind schedule. CMMR, Chemistry and Metallurgy Research Replacement Nuclear Facility at Los Alamos, originally projected to cost less than $1 billion. The last estimate before this project was put on hold was $3.7 to $5.8 billion, a six-fold increase with a scheduled delay of 8 to 12 years. This is why NNSA project management is on GAO's high-risk list. We believe that NNSA has made some progress. We believe they have a strong commitment and top leadership support and have developed and implemented corrective action plans to address these concerns. Going forward, we believe NNSA needs to demonstrate its commitment to sufficient people and resources and demonstrate on a sustained basis the ability to complete major construction projects on time and on budget. However, not to be forgotten, 80% of NNSA's budget is devoted to operations and maintenance activities and is not construction related. We recently raised concerns with NNSA's process for planning and prioritizing its work, including the need to more thoroughly review program estimates. We have recommended going forward that they update the requirements for reviewing cost estimates and reestablish independent analytic capability. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my opening remarks, and be happy to address any questions
I thank the gentleman.
The members may have.
Mr. Freeman, welcome again for your opening statement.
Chairman Stearns and Ranking Member DeGette and members of the subcommittee, I'm pleased to be here at your request to testify on matters relating to the oversight of the nuclear weapons complex by the Department of Energy and the National Nuclear Security Administration. With an annual budget of nearly $12 billion, NNSA is
Just going to ask you to move your mic a little closer if you don't mind.
Certainly. Is that better?
Yeah.
Yeah. NNSA is charged with critically important missions relating to nuclear weapons refurbishment and storage, nuclear nonproliferation, and science and technology. The directors of NNSA's contractor-operated national security laboratories, Los Alamos, Lawrence Livermore, and Sandia, as well as other independent review groups, have expressed concern that the Department and NSA oversight of contractors is overly burdensome. They recommended changes in the model, with the most radical being to take NNSA outside of the Department's purview entirely. We recognize, and I think everybody should, that it is difficult to strike precisely the right balance between the contractor's desire to operate without undue oversight and the government's need to ensure the taxpayers' interests in the operation of the laboratories and the other facilities is protected. We agree that oversight should not be overly burdensome. It should be targeted, cost-effective, risk-based, and it should encourage intelligent risk tolerance. However, at the end of the day, responsible federal officials have an obligation to a higher authority, the U.S. taxpayers, to ensure that the terms and conditions of the various NNSA contracts are satisfied, the national security mission goals are met, and that the weapons complex is operated in an effective, efficient, and safe and secure manner. Our reviews have identified numerous opportunities to enhance various aspects of NNSA's functions, including its management of the national security laboratories and other weapons complex facilities. Most prominently, we recently issued a special inquiry report on the security breach at the Y-12 National Security Complex in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. You've heard about that previously from prior speakers. In the Y-12 report, we cited a delayed and inept response, inoperable security equipment, excessive use of compensatory measures, resource constraints, and most importantly, as it pertains to the purpose of this hearing, contract administration issues. We have no evidence, empirical or otherwise, to suggest that unreasonable department and NNSA oversight has had a causal relationship to the problems we identified in our reviews. In fact, in many cases, the Y-12 matter being a prime example, we found the department and NNSA have not been as thorough as we felt necessary in exercising their contract administration responsibilities. Further, NNSA is currently dealing with a number of cost, schedule, and mission issues concerning major projects, including over $13 billion in capital investments in the projects that Mr. Gaffigan just referred to. With projects of such magnitude and complexity, federal officials have a special responsibility to ensure that taxpayer dollars are well spent and the national security is protected. Further, the unique contractor indemnification provision of NNSA's management operating contracts place special burdens on the federal management team. In short, the department bears ultimate financial responsibility for essentially all contractor activities which are nuclear related. In my judgment, this argues for a robust contractor oversight. There are a number of threshold questions regarding the oversight model which have yet to have been answered from my perspective. For example, to what extent does current oversight hinder mission accomplishment? How would a new model lead to tangible improvements in scientific and technological outcomes? And how would a new model improve accountability and transparency? In our view, any decision to modify the NNSA weapons complex governance model should ensure that first, historic safety and security concerns regarding weapons complex management are treated as a priority. Second, the synergies that result from numerous collaborations between the national security laboratories and the department's other laboratories and energy functions are not impeded. Third, expectations of the contractors are as clear and precise as possible. Fourth, that metrics are in place to provide a sound basis for evaluating contractor and program performance. Fifth, that any new operating formulation is lean and mean, reflecting current budget realities. And finally, that contractors have in place an effective internal governance system. We support continuous improvement, but a scalpel rather than a cleaver approach ought to guide efforts to find better NNSA contractor oversight mechanisms. The problems with the status quo need to be well defined, all remedies cost effective, and the core mission maintained. The work of the NNSA and its weapons complex is too important to do anything less. This concludes my testimony, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, and I'll start with my questions. Just as an overview, I think everyone should understand why 12 is a connotation given to this site because of the Cold War, and they didn't want to have people mention geographically what they were talking about, where it was, so Y12 became the code name. But if you go on Google Maps and look at the site, you see that it's a brand new site. And if you go on the Microsoft site, you see it's under construction. So this really is a site that has brand new construction. And so, Mr. Freeman, the first question I have for you is, as I understand it, these people cut and got their way through 3 fences. Is that correct?
That's my understanding, Mr. Chairman, yes.
Okay. And so it's at 3 or 4 fences?
Well, my understanding is it's 3. There are people on the panel who may have more intimate knowledge than I do.
Okay. We appreciate your hand being up, but we're limiting ourselves to the panel, if you don't mind.
Well, people on the panel.
Yeah. Is there anyone else who? Yes, sir. Mr. Poneman.
Sir, there is an outer perimeter fence up
Okay.
at the ridge line. They call the 229 fence.
Okay.
That is not censored. Then there were the 3 PITUS.
Okay, so they actually went through 4 fences.
They would have had to come through the perimeter, yes, and then there were the 3
Okay.
PITUS fences near the
So
facility.
once they got through these 4 fences, it's assuming that in all these fences there's some type of sensor device which would indicate, and there'd be cameras. Is that true, Mr. Freeman?
That is correct.
So there's cameras set up to monitor this?
That is correct.
And how highly rated was Y12 security prior to this incident? So, I mean, what was the record there saying it was rated?
Sort of the contractor self-assurance indicated that it was highly rated, and that was carried through by
I was told it
federal
was
oversight
rated by
personnel.
the contractor and
The federal personnel endorsed that rating.
at 96%. Is that what I was told? That was what they rated it.
I don't have a percentage for you, Mr. Chairman.
Would you consider it a Fort Knox type of security? I mean, that was the perception, is it had to be Fort Knox type of security?
Well, Mr. Stearns, this is my nearly 40 years in the Department of Energy. Y12 was the Fort Knox of the department.
Okay, so
historically.
these folks in the audience here, the 3 of them, they got through 4 fences that were censored, and the cameras were all set up, and this was a new facility. Were the cameras new or old?
There were actually some of the equipment was fairly new, some of the equipment was old, but I think the salient point is that many of the cameras or some of the cameras were not operable.
Okay, so the cameras were not operable. Now, when you generally have a Fort Knox facility like this, wouldn't there be large maintenance records for these cameras that people would check them? Were there backlogs relating to these cameras?
There were significant. We found significant backlogs in maintenance of.
Were there large maintenance entries into these backlogs to show that the cameras were looked at?
I'm not sure I understand your question, Mr. Chairman.
Well, if you went into these backlogs that show the maintenance on these cameras,
right?
Did you see maintenance on these cameras?
Well,
you're saying they're inoperable. It wouldn't, at some point, somebody
maintenance had not taken place. The cameras had not been fixed. If that's
okay.
your question.
Okay. Well, how long were these cameras, these critical cameras, not operable? Could you tell that?
Well, there were elements of the security apparatus that were inoperable for at least 6 months and possibly beyond that, at least 6 months.
Now, who would you blame that for? The contractor or the site government operators?
Well, Mr. Chairman, it sounds like a very simple question, but it's a complex. The answer is somewhat complex.
Well, let me phrase it for
there's
you.
enough. Let me put it
You
this
think
way.
the responsibility, we pay contractors to do this, is that correct?
Correct.
And the contractors were responsible?
Correct.
And we pay them significant fees
We
to do
do.
this. And they were not operable, and the maintenance backlog showed that no one was doing anything. So wouldn't you say the contractors?
I would say they have a major share of responsibility, yes.
And then the on-site government employees who are overseeing the contractors also have responsibility because they failed to catch this. Is that correct?
They do. There was widespread knowledge and acknowledgement of the fact that these cameras, including amongst the federal officials, these cameras in other facilities were inoperable. I think their reaction to that was much too passive, much too lethargic.
Well, I think we've got them through 4 fences. We've got them through the sensing devices. We're not keying the personnel. The cameras were inoperable. So they got through, and as I understand, there was a period of time where these 3 people were right at the facility and nothing still happened. Is that true?
Well, there was a delay in the response, and
How long was the delay in the response?
I can't go into timelines.
Okay.
And you may be able to get that information at the later, the classified briefing.
All right. So at this point, we have obviously a dereliction of duty. Is there anyone on the committee that would like to add any questions, any response to some of my questions that I had? Mr. Poneman?
Sir, just for the record, it is my understanding, and we will confirm this, you talked about all 4 fences being censored. It is my understanding that there are no trespassing signs on the outer perimeter fence at the ridge line, but the sensors only come into play once you penetrate the first of the 3 fences that surround the actual facility. So I believe it would be fair to say that, and the sensor bed is inside those 3 fences, not out at the perimeter fence. But we will confirm that and come back to the committee.
Were the guards who were supposed to be there and take care and stop this, were they blind in any way? And did they have, was there any obstruction for them to see this? I mean, forget the cameras for a moment. Wouldn't you start to, at some point, say, gosh, what's happening? I'm starting to see 3 people in my facilities wandering around. I mean, where were the guards? Were they, well, Mr. Freeman, what's your interpretation?
As has been either implied or stated directly earlier, there were a huge number of false alarms ongoing on a regular basis there due to critters and squirrels and other things. So they were somewhat, from my point of view, numbed by the number of false alarms. There was a delay in the response. The response of the first responder was less than adequate. So there was certainly shortcomings on the part of the
Okay, my time's expired.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think your questions really set up a factual foundation for what I want to talk about. The first thing I want to do is I want to thank Sister Rice and the other people for coming today. I apologize you won't be allowed to testify. I think it would be interesting to hear your perspective on how you were able to breach these 4 fences at the Fort Knox type of facility, and perhaps we can talk afterwards. But what I want to ask you gentlemen about is, from my perspective, this bill that we passed earlier this year, the National Defense Authorization Act, which is H.R. 4310, because what that does, as you know, it makes considerable changes to NNSA's structure and its oversight relationship with DOE. And a lot of us on both sides of the aisle are really concerned that the changes will have a significant impact on safety and security at NNSA. So, Mr. Poneman, I wanted to start with you, and I wanted to ask you how H.R. 4310 changes the NNSA administrator's authority to change nuclear safety and security requirements.
Congressman, thank you for the question. It is our understanding that legislation makes significant changes in the reporting structure and the authorities within the department. that it significantly curtails the authority of the Secretary to direct the administrator of the NNSA, and that it provides for a number of things that would tend to delegate activities, for example, to a National Lab Directors Council and so forth, that would then come in directly to the administrator, and the administrator under that legislation, as we understand it, would be granted much widened autonomy.
Right.
In addition, the Defense Nuclear Facilities Board would be reduced in some of its authority.
And that would really undermine the DOE's authority for oversight, correct?
In our judgment, Congresswoman, as reflected in the statement of
Yes or no will
administration
work.
position, yes.
Thank you. Now, as the current language is written, I think you mentioned this, somewhere down the line, an NNSA administrator could come in and actually reduce the safety and security requirements, correct?
It would curtail the Secretary's authority to...
But they could actually reduce the requirements, correct, under the
I think
legislation?
if that became law, yes.
Okay, yes. Now, H.R. 4310 also changes NNSA's relationship with oversight bodies, including DOE's Office of Health, Safety, and Security and the Defense Nuclear Facility Safety Board. So, Mr. Poneman, maybe Mr. Podonsky can help you here. Can you talk to me about what changes it makes to NNSA's relationship with the DOE and independent oversight bodies?
What changes the legislation would make?
Correct.
It would grant a much larger measure of autonomy to NNSA within the DOE system. The DOE system includes the HSS organization that Mr. Podonsky leads.
Okay. Now, do you think that's a good idea to reduce NNSA oversight? Yes or no will work?
We have serious concerns with
Okay.
that legislation.
Do you think that if the bill is passed as is, it could have an impact on the security and safety of workers at NNSA sites?
If the authorities of the Secretary are curtailed in that way, it could have an adverse effect.
Okay. Now, Mr. Gaffigan, I'm not asking you to comment on the NDAA, but your testimony said, your written testimony said in 2007, the GAO concluded that the drastic change of moving NNSA away from DOE was, quote, unnecessary. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And so from your perspective, is a significant overhaul of the agency structure necessary to solve the problems we're seeing today? Yes or no will work?
Not necessarily. They have to
Okay.
focus
So
on...
you don't think we necessarily need a significant overhaul,
We have not
right?
seen the problem being excessive oversight. We've seen the problem being ineffective oversight.
Ineffective, yeah. Less oversight is not the solution here, right?
We have not seen excessive oversight as the problem.
Okay. Mr. Friedman, what do you think? Would reorganizing the NNSA so that contractors have more autonomy and less oversight solve the problems of the agency?
Well, Mr. Gett, I would characterize it as the tail wagging the dog, frankly. I think that it would be a mistake to dramatically lessen the quality of the oversight. Now, there are, as I indicated in my testimony, there are improvements. And intelligent oversight is extremely important. So there are improvements that can occur.
Right.
But I think the legislation that you're referring to goes too far.
So I just have kind of one last question. And I'm going to ask you, Mr. Friedman, and you, Mr. Gaffigan. Do you think that overly burdensome oversight caused Sister Rice and her colleagues to be able to gain access to a secure area at a nuclear facility?
Well,
Yes or no? Do you think that the reason she got in there was because there was too much oversight?
Clearly not.
Okay. Mr.
No.
Gaffigan?
No.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentlelady. Mr. Barton, the former chairman of the full committee, is recognized.
Thank you. I had to go do a little press interview while the chairman was doing his questions, but my understanding is he established that there were 4 fences that were broached. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Were they all chain link fences?
Yes, sir.
All chain link fences. Is it classified how long that took?
Yes, sir.
It is classified. Were there any cameras that were operable? We know that there are some that weren't. Were there some
yes,
that
sir.
were?
There were cameras at the site that were operable.
They just weren't where these people were doing their thing. Let's assume that we actually had good security. What would have happened had it been discovered that these 3 individuals were trying to get in the facility?
The censored part of the fences are the 3 fences that are relatively close to the facility, Congressman. If the system had worked properly, as soon as they penetrated the first link, the sensor would have gone off, and when they saw, as would be the case when people were coming through, that there were multiple sensors going off, there would have been an immediate response within 1 or 2 minutes of guards on the site.
So even if it had been working and the guards had been alert and everything that was supposed to have been done would have been done, they would have been able to get through the first fence before anything was done. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. The theory is one of layered defenses, and we could go into classified session. There are many, many layers between that outermost security fence and the sensitive material. But
well,
that would be what triggered the response.
I'm not a security expert, but I would assume that we'd have a security system at a weapons complex or an enrichment facility that if anybody got within 10 feet of the first fence, alarms would start going off and dogs would start barking and loudspeakers would sing, get away, or something like that, instead of waiting, actually walk up to the fence, use a pair of wire cutters, and cut the fence before anybody even assumes that there's something wrong. I mean, that seems to me to be a little bit lax. Am I just not with it to think that we shouldn't even let them get near the first fence?
We welcome you to the facility, Congressman. You have to establish the perimeter in some specific place, and you have to put the first sensor in some specific place. That sensor is placed in such a manner as if it had been responded to appropriately before they were able to do anything at the wall, there would have been security forces on site. So you have to put the first sensor somewhere.
But my point is, you don't let them get close enough to take out the wire cutters without somebody noticing them. I mean, if I were to go to the facility today with a pair of wire cutters, hat on, says I'm a fake terrorist, I would hope somebody would notice that before I started cutting on the fence.
Well, I assure you, Congressman, we're taking a full review of the full profile. You could see if doing something at the outer perimeter fence up at the ridge line would be better, but then you were talking about acres and acres of security, which is challenging.
Is the Deputy Secretary at the Department of Energy the number 2 official?
Yes, sir.
So the Secretary's number 1 and you're number 2?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Could you rank this issue in a priority of issues at the Department of Energy for the management attention of you and the Secretary? Is this a top 5 issue, a top 10 issue, top 100 issue?
Congressman, there is no issue that we are dealing with more forcefully and with greater concentration than this issue. This relates to protecting our nuclear material. It has top priority.
So this is got the personal, serious attention of you and the Secretary?
Hours and hours.
Okay. And the gentleman to your right, Mr. D'Agostino, is that close?
Mr. Barton, D'Agostino.
Agostino.
Yes, sir.
I would assume that on a day-to-day basis, you're the person ultimately responsible for this at the department, I know you're at the Nuclear Security Administration, but I would assume that you are the number 1 person in terms of just thinking about this. Is that correct?
Every day I think about this issue, and specifically, but in every day I also think about security in general. This is the number 1 priority for me, bar none.
Do you believe, since it's your number 1 priority, that we can fix this problem?
I believe we can fix it. We have work to do. It's inexcusable. It's appalling. The language the committee has used here, I would agree with. We have to work aggressively. We've taken unprecedented steps to address this particular problem. It's important to hold organizations accountable. It's important to hold people accountable for this, and we are working through that particular process. In addition to the steps we've taken, we believe there are more steps to take, and we're working very closely with Glenn Podonsky and the HSS organization to make sure we absolutely have that right.
My time's expired, but I want to ask one more. Is it possible under current policy at the Department of Energy to terminate the contractor who allowed this to happen?
Sir, we, because of this incident, issued what we call a show cause notice to the contractor, which gives them a set period to respond. given the facts that are inconsistent with our contractual responsibility to provide security at the site, to show cause why the contract should not be terminated.
So the answer is yes, they can be terminated.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you, Mr.
The Chairman Emeritus is really asking the question. I'll ask him for us. Has anybody been fired because of this incident?
Sir, there have been a number of personnel changes. The way the structure...
No one's been fired, though?
Oh, no. There have been a number of changes. The two top contractor officials at the site were retired within 12 days.
Okay.
A number of other people have been moved out of their positions from the guard force, from the contractor as well.
Doesn't sound like anybody's been fired. Ms. Christensen, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to direct my questions at Mr. Poneman, but I would believe that Mr. Podolsky might be able to assist in answering. The DOE's Office of Health, Safety, and Security has been able to identify major security flaws within several DOE nuclear facility sites, all through the various security and safety oversight inspections that it conducts. So, Mr. Poneman, can you talk briefly about the inspections the Office of Health, Safety, and Security is currently doing across the DOE complex?
Yes, Congresswoman. We highly value their role as our internal independent oversight organization, and therefore Secretary directed Mr. Podolsky to A, dispatch a team immediately to Y-12, but B, to assemble a team that draws from other parts of the department to make sure all of the sites in the complex that have Category 1 nuclear materials are looked at quickly to see if there are any urgent changes that we need to make in other sites. And then the third thing we've asked Mr. Podolsky to do is an in-depth, what we call a comprehensive inspection by his oversight organization, which will take 3 weeks at each of the 12 sites, and over the course of 12 months, do a deep dive, force-on-force training, and make sure if there are any deeper problems that need to be addressed that we can do that.
Okay, and Mr. Chairman, these assessments will certainly be helpful to the committee, and perhaps we could have DOE come back to us once they've finished those assessments. So what kind of inspections did HSS do at Y-12 facility before? And what did they find?
I think I'd let Mr. Podolsky address that.
Yes, ma'am. In 2008, we did what we call a comprehensive security inspection. By definition, comprehensive means that we do force-on-force limited performance testing. We look at personnel security, protection program management, physical security systems, material control accountability. We look at the entire kaleidoscope of security subjects to make sure that we know how effective the requirements are being implemented. It's not just an inspection to make sure that people are complying, but we also take a look to see how they're performing. And it was in that inspection that we identified a number of serious problems that resulted in findings that the NNSA, according to DOE orders, would then be responsible for fixing and putting a corrective action plan in place, well, which they did. Many of those findings, we believe, if they were completely fixed and maintained, then perhaps the events that occurred in July of 2012 would not have occurred.
So when did that take place?
That was in 2008, and the report was issued and briefed out in 2009.
So you don't believe that all of the vulnerabilities were addressed, or they were addressed but not maintained?
In all fairness, they were addressed in 2009. They put together their corrective actions, but then as 2010, 2011, we believe they deteriorated.
Is there any reason that we should be worried about other facilities that may be susceptible to similar breaches?
We should always look for improvements, Congresswoman, and that's why the Deputy and the Secretary directed us to go out and do immediate comprehensive inspections of all of our Category 1 facilities.
Thank you. The August IG report revealed that several of the security mechanisms in place at the Y-12 facility, if functioning properly, would have allowed personnel to quickly identify and locate the intruders. Mr. Friedman, can you tell us what those mechanisms were?
Well, the cameras are a perfect example. They've been discussed already during the hearing. They should all have been fully functioning, and the maintenance process should have been such that high priority maintenance, high priority security components would have been repaired within a very short period of time if in fact they broke down for any or became inoperable for any reason. Also, we found another was compensatory measures. Compensatory measures are implemented when there is a mechanical failure. They were in place for much too long, and therefore they lost their character as a short-term measure to address a problem in the immediate term, but not for the long term, and as it was intended.
And who was responsible for that, for maintaining the cameras? Or was it the contractor? Was it?
Well, the contractor had primary responsibility, but there certainly was responsibility on the part of the site officials, the federal site officials as well.
Well, you know, the incident, as has been said, makes it clear that independent DOE oversight of NNSA and its contractors are very important, and I look forward to seeing the outcome of DOE's inspections throughout the nuclear complex and the actions taken in response to these inspections. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank the gentlelady. Mr. Terry, Nebraska is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And first, I just want to say that I appreciate the gentlelady Diane DeGette's questions about some legislative language, and I happen to agree with her position. And I think most of us do, that we need more oversight, efficient oversight, force on force. I mean, we can't do enough here to make sure that they're secure. So we have to change a culture. But I want to go back to the cameras, because as I understand security, it isn't that sensors are number one and then cameras are number two, and there's kind of a list that you go down. Sensors and cameras are part of the same. They're yin and the yang. Sensors go off, you view the cameras to see what's occurring. So I think that would be critical. But yet it was deemed not to be critical. Is that correct, Mr. Poneman?
Yes, sir. On both points, it is critical, and it was not deemed to be critical.
Yeah, and so how long were I don't know if we established how long the cameras were not operating. How many weeks, days, months?
In at least one instance, the IG report noted the camera was broken on the order of 6 months.
6 months?
Yes, sir.
6 months for something that universally at this table you would deem cameras as critical.
Yes, sir. And indeed,
someone there made a decision that they weren't critical. Who was that? Or what entity makes that decision?
That was something that would have been in the hands of the M&O contractor to propose what's system critical and what's not.
No.
Yeah, and then it would be up to the federal oversight to be cognizant of that and to be allowing it to continue.
Appreciate it. Did you want to say something?
No, just I was making sure my microphone was off, so because I thought I saw the light on. I agree with the Deputy Secretary said it absolutely right. We have a contract with our M&O contractor down in Y12 to take care of this equipment, put it on a high priority. The camera maintenance was not prioritized as to be fixed. Our federal oversight should have caught that. That information, as it's floated in reports and oversight from the program side in Washington, should have been able to pick that data out. As the Inspector General said, there were indicators in our reports, but when there are too many indicators, the real indicator gets lost in the noise. And so the important thing here is on oversight, in my opinion, and I do greatly value independent oversight.
That's what we want.
Yes, sir. That we have to make sure our oversight is done not only in the quantity but in the quality that allows us to pick out these flags and not have the important indicators buried in reports. That's the important thing from my standpoint.
Hey, I'm just curious, Mr. Poneman, how these were down, cameras were down for 6 months. Once they were fixed, evidently they were fixed within a couple days after the incident. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. They've all been fixed, sir.
What was wrong with the cameras?
I don't know what was wrong with the cameras, but I think Mr. D'Agostino put it very well.
Mr. D'Agostino, do you know what was wrong with the cameras?
Not in a specific way. We can take that question for the record and get back to the committee.
Mr. Podolsky, do you know?
I have an inspection team on the site right now, and what I understand with those two particular cameras that were out,
Yeah.
One was an inner workings of the camera and took 24 hours to fix that. The other one was a trip switch that had to be just flipped on.
A trip switch, what does that mean?
That, I'm not a systems engineer, but that
a
tells
circuit
me
breaker?
that a circuit breaker was flipped.
So all they had to do was look at it and go like that, and that camera would have worked again.
That's what my inspectors
But it
were
was
telling me.
down for 6 months. So I guess to conclude in the last 40 seconds, Mr. Friedman, you made a comment regarding we need a scalpel, not a cleaver.
I did.
I may disagree. When you have that level of incompetence to keep the same people and organization in place probably isn't a good decision. There, we probably need a cleaver. I yield back.
Ms. Schakowsky is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to focus on a more fundamental question involved in all of this. That's the use of private contractors altogether. You know, we made a decision as a country in 1828 that we would be protected here at the Congress, members of Congress and the public, by people who wear the badge. And I'm looking at the recruiting website, and it says, wear the badge, feel the honor, the moment of transformation when you slip into the uniform, put on the badge, and join our elite ranks. What does it take to join this prestigious team? A deep sense of patriotism, unyielding dedication to protecting the public, and a passion for the American way of life are just the beginning. DOE is the largest non-defense department contracting agency in the federal government, and this is probably one of the most sensitive missions, stewardship of the nation's nuclear weapons stockpile. And when you look at who the contractor is, the company that holds the security contractor is WSI Oak Ridge. It's my understanding that this is a local branch of G4S Global Solutions, formerly known as Wackenhut, the same company that recently apologized to the British Parliament for failing to provide enough security guards for the London Olympics, and that they also owned the company Armor Group, which was involved in serious abuses, including sexual hazing and disgusting photos we were all privy to at the U.S. Embassy in Kabul in 2009. Now, I don't understand, one, why this company has any role to play. I'd like to know if you have any concerns about the performance of this particular company, if the government has taken any steps to hold both B&W Y-12 and WSI Oak Ridge accountable for the security breach and any other misconduct. I've seen reports that the current contracts for B&W expires September 30th, and WSI's contract ends November 30th, and wondered if we're going to get rid of them. And perhaps even more fundamentally, I wonder if anybody's really done a cost analysis of what it would be to have someone with pride wear the badge of the United States of America, be in the line of command, and guard something as sensitive as this, rather than hiring these private outside contractors. That's a lot of questions, but I would like to at least begin.
These are profound questions, Congresswoman, and they come in two sections. I'm going to address each of your concerns. The question you raise about whether the protective force should be federal employees or contractor employees is a long-standing question that's been looked at going back to the late 1940s when it first went in the direction that it did for security contractors being hired. What you said about that sense of mission and patriotism, that is what we believe should be held by all of us, including contractors. We say that we all work for the president. Now, there have been a number of reports, including GAO reports, that have weighed the pros and cons, of which there are many. But it comes down to something that I think Mr. Gaffigan said well in his testimony. There's no substitute for management. And you have to stay...
Well, talk to me about this particular company. Haven't they done enough to preclude them from being hired? I mean, how many apologies have to be issued?
that's the segue to the second part of your question. Now, in this particular case, the first thing we did was we found that since the contract structure had an independent contract for the protective force disaggregated from some of the systems that your colleague mentioned, we put WAC and HUD under the M&O contractor so we had a single line of command, point one. Point two, we then issued this show cause notice that said given the security breaches that were experienced at Y-12, the contractors, which would include both the M&O contractor and WAC and HUD, or WSIs at the site, show cause why the contract should not be terminated. And the third point is, on your point about the contracts soon to expire, any subsequent competition would be informed by the record of the contractors in their last term of service under contract. So that would very much influence any decision, and there would therefore be consequences.
Let me just say, if this were part of a normal chain of command of people who wore the badge of the United States of America, these people were out, they would be sanctioned, there would be some consequence immediately for that. Seems to me a company who has been engaged in the kind of practices that they have, first of all, should be off the list of contractors, and I think we ought to reconsider this issue of whether or not private contractors are appropriate for this level of sensitive mission. And I yield back.
May I just point out, if I might, that in November of 2011, we, in our management challenge report for the Department of Energy, we recommended that we take a close look at how the structure and the provision of protective forces at the DOE facilities around the country, including, by the way, Argonne and Fermi. And one of the options that we put on the table was, in fact, federalizing the workforce. It is a very complicated issue. It goes back a long time, as the Deputy Secretary indicated, but we think it's time to relook that issue, and we agree with you there.
Gentlelady's time has expired. Dr. Burgess is recognized for 5 minutes.
So if I just heard you correctly, Mr. Inspector General, you said you feel it's now time to relook at the issue. You know, there was a situation in 2007, 6 cruise missiles, each loaded with a nuclear warhead, mistakenly loaded on a B-52 bomber at Minot Air Force Base and transported to Barksdale, North Dakota to Louisiana. The warheads were supposed to be removed before the missiles were taken from storage. The missiles with the nuclear warheads were not reported missing and remained mounted to the aircraft at both Minot and Barksdale for 36 hours. The warheads were not protected by various security precautions required for nuclear weapons. They never left the base. No one sprayed paint on them. No one protested. But Secretary Gates demanded the resignation of the Air Force Secretary and Chief of Staff of the Air Force. Where's the sense of urgency here? I haven't heard it this morning. Mr. Terry said, scalpel a cleaver, he prefers a cleaver. I don't understand why these individuals are free to be here in the hearing room today. Why are they not incarcerated? My understanding is they've been charged with both criminal trespass, which is a misdemeanor, and destruction of federal property, which is a felony. My understanding is one of the individuals is a repeat offender. Do they pose a flight risk? I don't know. They don't seem like reliable individuals. It's hard to be against a nun and a house painter and an electrician, whatever their professions are, but at the same time, why are they even here in this hearing room? Why are they not being held in detention somewhere? What is to prevent them from doing the very same thing tomorrow night or the night after? Mr. Barton posed a very good question. Carrying a Bible to a secure nuclear facility is one thing, but it could have been anything. It could have been anything. Where is the sense of urgency to stop this problem? The pogo folks, the oversight guys that are always posting stuff, said the Boy Scouts would have done a better job. So where is the sense of urgency?
Congressman, there is, if that's directed to me, there is no greater urgency that we face in the complex. We are working this every day, all day, and we have from the day of the incident. And we immediately took the actions to remove the guards who were responsible. We immediately fixed the cameras. We immediately dispatched teams. We immediately took the general from our Pantex facility, who's an expert at security, and sent him up to make sure that the best practices that are in force in Pantex. And we have done this from day one, and we continue to do it, and we're going to keep working at it until we feel confident that the job has been well done.
Have those guards been fired? I think the answer to that question is no, they've been reassigned. Are they going to be barred from working on any sort of similar security arrangement in the future? I don't think we've gotten an answer to that. Who in the agency has taken responsibility? Secretary Gates asked for the resignation of the Assistant Secretary of the Air Force. Where is that accountability in this situation, which I would submit is no less serious than what occurred in Minot, North Dakota?
We agree with the seriousness, Congressman. That's precisely why we've got General Finnan doing the internal reviews. We have taken the people who are on the line in terms of our own federal oversight and reassigned them to permit that review to be unimpeded. And we will follow every fact trail to the end of the earth and find out what happened. And we will, as Secretary Gates did, hold people responsible.
Well, I think the response was much more immediate in Secretary Gates' situation. Mr. Friedman, Inspector General Friedman, on the issue of compensatory measures, one of the federal officials, according to your report, this is, I'm referencing here the special report in the inquiry of the security breach at the National Nuclear Security Administration's Y-12 National Complex under compensatory measures on page 4. You say one of these federal officials also indicated that they have been instructed not to evaluate and report on how the contractors were conducting business. Is that an accurate statement?
That is an accurate statement.
Well, if that's the case, as long as they were doing an adequate job was the other part of that statement. In this case, were they doing an adequate job in deciding how to accomplish their security mission for the Department of Energy?
Well, as the very essence of our report is, we think not.
So I guess my question to you is, I mean, you're the law enforcement person here. You're the Inspector General. Where is the accountability that you're going to extract because they clearly failed at their mission?
Well, you're right in your characterization of what my job is, and it included, by the way, effectuating the arrest of the 3 trespassers, and we're proceeding on that case. And your earlier point, Dr. Burgess is exactly correct. The judicial system is now the timing mechanism. It's not the Department of Energy or the Office of Inspector General. With regard to your second point, is we generally do not identify particular individuals. There are cases where this does occur, who ought to be fired. That's the responsibility of management to take our report and the other information they have available to them and make whatever judgments they seek to make with regard to firing individuals, personnel actions, or disassociating the department from certain contractors who have not acted well.
Well, these are individuals who walked through the so-called fatal force zone. Out in Los Alamos several years ago, I saw a force-on-force exercise out there. It was pretty impressive, all of the tools that they had at their disposal. Why was none of that used?
Dr. Burgess, I'm sorry, I really didn't. Could you repeat the question? I'm sorry.
At Los Alamos in 2005,
right.
I was given a demonstration of the force-on-force exercise that would be instituted were there a serious security breach. I would submit that this was serious. You got through 4 fences. You had something the size of a Bible. What would it have taken to institute that force-on-force?
Gentleman's time has expired. You go ahead.
I will. My answer to your question, Dr. Burgess, is really the following. One of the fact that the nun, one of the trespassers, is here today makes this even more meaningful, I suppose. Is we have testimony from sharpshooters who are on the protective force at the site that if the trespassers, if they had clear sight of the trespassers, they might have taken them out or attempted to take them out at that time. So the aggressive force that you witnessed on the force-on-force exercises at Los Alamos exists, at least theoretically, at Y-12 as well.
To confirm, then, you had snipers at Y-12?
Well, I don't want to characterize their abilities. They are highly trained, very professional, paramilitary, former SEALs, very competent individuals in terms of their physical abilities and the training generally. Clearly, there was a breakdown in this case, but you should not believe that these are people who are not equipped to do the job when they have to do the job.
I understand. The gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Castor, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And let me start by expressing my dismay over this security breach. It is appalling on all levels for the government and for the private contractors that had responsibility here. Last night, the Washington Post published a story noting that the security lapses that allowed 3 protesters, including an 82-year-old nun, to gain access to the secure Y-12 area at Oak Ridge National Lab, that those security lapses had been identified by government investigators 2 years before the break-in. According to the Post, a 2010 classified report by DOE inspectors found that, quote, security cameras were inoperable, equipment maintenance was sloppy, and guards were poorly trained, unquote. Mr. Poneman, are you aware of this report?
Yes, ma'am.
Is what's being reported accurate?
Obviously, it's a classified report. We'd be very happy to go into it in closed session, and I would suggest we defer that.
What can you tell us now?
What I can tell you is what we've been very clear about, which is the characterization that you have used and your colleagues have used, appalling, is apt, that, as Mr. Gaffigan has testified, it's not just a matter of finding the thing that's wrong and fixing it, but sustaining that level of effort, and that we therefore had breakdown up and down the chain, including a sense of complacency that something like this could not happen, and we are vigorously doing everything we can to root that out and to put in place more effective security.
Can you tell us that after that 2010 report came out, that it was reviewed with Babcock and Wilcox, your contractors, Wackenhut, WSI, Oak Ridge?
I can tell you that that is what is supposed to happen with those kind of reports. In terms of what happened with that particular report, we would have to come back to you. I don't know exactly.
And Mr. D'Agostino, did I see you nod that it was reviewed with the contractors?
Yes, ma'am. As part of standard practice, all independent inspection reports by the Health, Safety, and Security Organization are briefed to both the federal officials and the contractor officials at each site. Given the consistency of Mr. Podolsky's organization doing these inspections, he could confirm, but there's no doubt in my mind that that these reports are in their hands. They get copies. They're copied on the reports. They have the reports. I do as well. I typically get the report. I read the executive summaries. I'm briefed by Mr. Podolsky's organization to give me the overall sense of the conditions. That's standard practice. The key, though, for me in this particular case is it's not enough just to read an executive summary and take a high-level look at the findings and get a brief by the organization. I actually have to read every page of that report.
Whose responsibility is it then to sit down with the contractors, with Babcock and Wilcox, Wackenhut, WSI, Oak Ridge, to go through that? Did you do that, Mr. Podolsky?
Ma'am, what we do, and we've been doing for 2 decades, is we independently assess the performance of the contractor and the feds on the site, and then we issue a report that's validated. And I won't bother to explain all the details, but it's a very rigorous process. So we stand.
I wonder if anyone here at the table read that report in 2010 and actively discussed it personally with the contractors.
I would tell you that when the team is on site, as they are right now at other sites, including Y-12, they actively validate daily.
I'm just wondering if any of you here had that report and had that discussion with the contractors. Yes, sir?
I read my reports, yes, ma'am.
And then did you?
And then it's up to the line to discuss with them, their contractors and with their own staff, how they're going to correct it. We don't.
So you didn't have any personal conversations on the phone or in person with the contractors? I'm just wondering if it was anyone's responsibility to do that, or if anyone did that here on the panel.
Ma'am, it's my responsibility to make sure my organization and my security organization does exactly that, go over the details of the report. As I mentioned earlier, I get the executive summaries. I get a brief by the independent inspection organizations on these reports, which I did in this particular case. And the key is, and so count on my security organization to go through the details page by page.
Thank you. And Mr. Freeman, your recent Y-12 report suggests that there may have been systemic failures to address maintenance issues at Y-12. I'd like to know, in a broader perspective, were the problems you saw at Y-12 symptomatic of larger issues here at this agency or the DOE?
Well, symptomatic in the sense that we have concerns about the whole notion of contract administration and contractor oversight and how that is effectuated throughout the department, yes. In terms of security, to be totally candid with you, we issued a report on a compromise of a force-on-force exercise in 2004. So we've had some continuing at Y-12.
And then back on the accountability for the contractors, are there any penalties built in to these contracts? I understand that you've now taken action, begun proceedings to fire the management contractor, the subsidiary of Babcock and Wilcox. But are there any penalties built into these type of contracts that if a breach like this occurs, not only do personnel lose their jobs, but there's some payment back to the DOE or the government?
The government always has the ability to reach back and look at past performance and make adjustments consistent with the contract, and our plans are to do just that in this case, ma'am.
Gentlelady's time has expired. The gentlelady from Tennessee is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank you all for your patience. I hope that it's not lost on you that this is something that concerns us tremendously. And having served in the state Senate in Tennessee, knowing how proud individuals in that part of the state are of that facility, having visited the facility many times myself, I think not only did you have a security breach, but you have now what you're seeing is a breach of the public trust in that area. You are charged with keeping that facility safe. You are charged with keeping the employees at that facility safe. And it is such, the ineptness and the negligence is mind-boggling as we look at this. Now, I want to go back to this 2010 report. A report comes out in 2010, and you review this report. Now, you have to review it with the contractors. Am I right there, Mr. Podolsky?
Yes, we validate the content of the contractors and the site.
Okay.
Office.
Now, with the site, who is the buck stops here? Do you have a guy who makes a decision at that facility that says these are serious issues?
That would be the site manager, the federal site manager.
Okay, the federal site manager. Did that individual make that decision that this was serious, and did they hold Babcock and Wilcox and WSI responsible and say, we're going to tie your money up until you straighten this out?
I would tell you from the independent oversight perspective, that's what's supposed to happen, and then we, as an organization, brief it up. As Administrator D'Agostino said, we did brief it to he and his security staff back in Washington. So it's up to Administrator D'Agostino to then make sure that the corrective actions through the site manager are taken.
Mr. D'Agostino, did you follow up with the site manager?
Yes, ma'am.
Did the site manager say we have taken action to fix these security lapses?
Yes, ma'am. In the 2009 report that was referenced.
When did he show proof that he had taken that?
I'll have to get you the exact month that he showed proof, but we had validated the closure of all of the findings, including the cameras.
Okay, then who's responsible that it didn't get done? Let me ask you this. Have any of you been on the ground at the Y-12 facility?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
All of you have been there?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
So all of you went, and all of you looked at this physical facility, and each of you reviewed the items that were pointed out and made sure boxes were checked, that they had been repaired, and signed off on this. Am I right on this?
No, ma'am. I
Okay.
visited
Mr.
the
Poneman?
site. I visited the site on earlier occasions, and as you know, having visited the site, it is an impressive site.
Yes, it is.
And
it deserves to be protected.
And it deserves for the site, for the people of the nation. Absolutely correct. One of the problems here is you have an evidence, what looks like invincibility, but we had specific shortcomings that were not adequately identified or addressed, or if they were fixed, the system was not fixed to the point that it was sustained. These are the things that we're trying to get our arms around right now. You're absolutely right. It has to have that kind of top level.
See, it just seems incomprehensible that you could have said, we have this report, we're doing this review, we have these problems. The problems are not fixed, are not fixed to completion. How could you continue the contract if they are not completed? And I have to tell you, listening to you all this morning, I got to tell you something. This is classic bureaucratic pass the buck. It's not my problem, it's somebody else's problem. Well, it is your problem.
Congressman.
You are charged with the responsibility of protecting these facilities, and we are charged with conducting the appropriate oversight for this. And to say, well, I reviewed it and so said, somebody somewhere has to say, are the cameras working? Are the fences complete? If you've got, 200 false alarms, you should know that there is a problem with something causing the false alarms. You know it's wildlife in this area. Is that not correct? So you fix it, but you don't allow it to continue and continue to pay the contract and then have something like this occur where you have individuals inside this facility. The security culture and the safety culture demands a better product from you all.
Yeah. Congressman, in terms of the priority that it deserves and in terms of the cultural requirement to be ever vigilant, you're absolutely correct. That's why within days of actually knowing about the problems that had been identified have been fixed, and we are now about the business of making sure, A, that we don't have problems like that anywhere else in the system, and B, that we take permanent, sustained, and sustainable measures to make sure that it
Sir, my time has expired, but I would offer that you fix them after you were embarrassed, and you fixed them 2 years too late. I yield back.
I fixed them as soon as we knew about them.
The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Green, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A question for everyone on the panel. The National Defense Authorization Act was passed by this chamber earlier this year, allows the National Nuclear Security Administration sites to adopt OSHA workplace standards in lieu of the NSAA present standards. Can anyone on the panel tell me the differences between what NSAA's present standards and the standards the House NDAA would allow? In addition, the OSHA standards provide more protection. Would OSHA standards provide more protection for the workers at those nuclear sites, and would OSHA standards be easier to enforce? Is OSHA stronger than what was original standards?
We have very strong standards, Congressman, in the Department of Energy. There are some similarities between OSHA standards and DOE standards, but there are some unique DOE requirements because of our unique nuclear responsibilities for such materials as beryllium and so forth. So we are informed by those standards, but the standards that the DOE employs are specific to the DOE complex and our unique requirements.
You can apply both, whichever is the toughest. Obviously, your standards are OSHA standards, I guess, for safety. Is there any is national nuclear security standards stronger than OSHA?
Well, the OSHA standards, Congressman, and my colleagues may wish to join me in explaining this, apply to general industrial safety.
Yeah.
And where we can apply globally recognized standards that apply to industrial safety, we do that. That's an efficient thing to do, to use validated peer-review standards such as OSHA. However, when there are those unique requirements that pertain to the use of beryllium and other things that are unique to our complex, we need special DOE tailored standards.
And if I could just agree with everything the Deputy Secretary said, we follow DOE directives on safety. Safety is critically important, and we are inspected by independent inspection, Mr. Bonansky's organization, as well as we have our own safety inspection standards. We don't believe that OSHA broadly applied is the way to go. We believe after years of analysis and work in developing the DOE directives on safety that we have the right set. It's something that requires constant vigilance, constant attention to detail as the security situation is pointed out. So we really do have to continue to keep eyes on the ball here, sir.
May I amplify on that, Congressman?
Sure.
the administration made it clear that the legislation that was proposed would hinder the Secretary's ability to manage safety and security within the NNSA. And specifically to your question on OSHA versus the standards that we have, our standards are much stronger. In fact, the administrator for OSHA would like to move OSHA more towards the DOE standards, but because their hazards are of not the same magnitude as ours, it's rather difficult.
Well, and obviously I have trouble with OSHA standards. I represent an area maybe not as, but refineries and chemical plants, and our standards, sometimes the company standards are tougher than OSHA, and I can understand that. The testimony by the Inspector General and the GAO submitted today indicate that there have been persistent safety problems at NNSA sites for the past decade. The GAO reported between 2000 and 2007 there were 60 serious accidents or near misses, including worker exposure to radiation and inhalation of toxic vapors, electrical shocks. And again, I'm interested in learning what DOE and NNSA are doing to protect the workers. Is 60 violations in 7 years, particularly dealing with the type of substances you have to do, it seems like that would be an awful lot.
Congressman, when it comes to anything nuclear, even one incident is one too many. Yeah. And I can assure you that we take gravely seriously our commitment and our responsibilities for the safety of our workers, of the neighbors of the facilities, and of the general public. We have addressed issues up, down, and sideways relating to improving our safety culture. The Secretary and I have both spent days and weeks going out to the sites, telling people they should feel free to come forward to express their safety.
I have one more question. Let me get our Mr. Griffin. Your testimony states that the problem of the NSA oversight is not a matter of being excessive or overbearing, but ineffective. What recommendations you provide for the oversight to be less ineffective, and what steps can be you report to the DOE in taking to make sure that oversight of the labs is as effective as possible?
And I think this applies to both safety and security. We have not found the problems to be the standards themselves. I think the standards are good. They're out there. They do find the problems. They do come up with good corrective action plans. And the thing that we think they fall short on over and over again, this is kind of deja vu all over again with both the safety and the security side. And we have reports going back to the early 2000s and beyond. The same issue of they identify the problem and then they come out with corrective action and it's not sustained. And I think you found in the testimony today, talking about 2008 when the first report came out, 2009, 2010, whenever these issues were first floated, yes, looks like some action was taken, but it wasn't sustained. And that seems to be the problem over and over again.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, gentlemen. Recognize Mr. Gardner. Gentleman from Colorado is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I have heard members of the committee as well as panelists before this committee describe what happened as inexcusable and as appalling, but I'd also say that it's become a little bit of a theme. If you look at some of the background material that we have been given before this committee hearing in the memorandum, it talks about committee hearings that were held, a series of Energy and Commerce Committee hearings held in 1999. It talks about 15 hearings held and numerous GAO investigations requested in 2004 and 2005 and 2008 and 2009. We've heard about reports in March of 2010. I have in my district 50 intercontinental ballistic missiles, Minuteman III, located in my district. And recently I went to F.E. Warren Air Force Base where I viewed the preparations that they go under to monitor the sites, the missile alert facilities, and the material that they are protecting. And certainly I don't think at any point was I concerned that they were becoming numb to an alarm that was going off. Because as I sat in the facility, there were alarms going off because a tumbleweed blew up against an electronic surveillance barrier. And they knew where to look for that, and they certainly checked it out and verified it. And it happened multiple times a day, as you can imagine, in the eastern plains of Colorado, where you have wildlife, where you have tumbleweeds, where you have high wind, where you have snow that builds drifts that may cause an alert. Watching the shadows on the video monitor of the drifts to make sure that nothing was changing. And yet we continue to see this theme that it sounds like you know what's wrong. It sounds like you've identified the problem, but I don't know that we've had the governance structure in place that actually accomplishes the protections that we need of what obviously is a critical matter of national security. And some of these questions have been asked before. Some of them have been talked about here, but I do want to follow up and do a little bit of repeating of what's happened. And so, Mr. Friedman, in your report, in your IG report, you say that one official in NNSA was talking about how had been instructed not to evaluate and report on how the contractors were conducting business. And we talk a little bit about the contractors, whether or not they have done an adequate job deciding how to accomplish the mission. We talked about effective management, and so I guess the question is actually not for you, Mr. Friedman, but to Mr. D'Agostino. How do we make sure that we have the management that we need for a contractors to make decisions if the federal site officials are not able to evaluate how the contractor is doing their job?
Mr. Gardner, that is the question, is to make sure, it's my responsibility to make sure that my federal overseers in the program understand that my expectation is that they do oversee the contractor in these high hazard, highly important, critical missions of nuclear safety and nuclear security, and that we have an independent oversight structure in place to check that we are actually doing that particular thing. In this particular case, you referenced a quote, I think, from Mr. Friedman's report. We had clearly a situation that was unacceptable, where an inexcusable, and this is why we're conducting the reviews, because we want to understand what happened in the translation of oversight, that we have people at our site offices thinking that they cannot and should not and are not allowed to oversee the contract in that way. So we want to track this down. We want to get this review done, and General Finnan's review, as the Deputy Secretary had mentioned, clearly is a step towards digging beyond just what we've been, in some of the pieces we've been talking about on specific numbers of cameras, which is important, but we want to get to that underlying thing that allows us to sustain oversight, effective oversight in the right way, and as Mr. Friedman's report says, do it in a risk-based way where our attention is faced on the highest, most important activities.
Do you carry out perimeter checks? I mean, do you carry out perhaps drills or tests that may breach a perimeter just to check response?
Yes, but we clearly need to do more of these and do what we...
How often do you carry those out?
Right now, those checks are now being ascribed every time we conduct a visit from headquarters, that we are going to do that check. We are going to have federalized from...
How often were they carried out before the incident at Y-12?
They're carried out on a regular basis.
What's a regular basis?
Regular basis is on a weekly basis by the protective force. We expect our contractor to have a performance assurance system. They have to prove to the federal government, we have a contract with them, that they are checking themselves. And so they have...
And are you reviewing those checks?
Yes, sir. Those checks get reviewed. The challenge is to have these checks done in such a way that they actually test conditions on the ground, not the fact that we have a contractor knowing that something is going to happen, so they're ready to go.
Yield back. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Markey, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, very much. Thank you, Sister Megan Rice, for being here. Thank you for your actions. Thank you for your willingness to focus attention on this nuclear weapons buildup that still exists in our world, and how much we need to do something to reduce it. We don't need more nuclear weapons. We need fewer nuclear weapons. We don't need more hostility with Russia. We need less hostility with Russia. We thank you. We thank you for your courage. I went to the Immaculate Conception Grammar School, Malden Catholic, Boston College, and Boston College Law School. So I went to Catholic school every day for 20 years. And I'm very influenced, of course, by everything that the nuns taught me. It's important that we have nuns on the bus, not under the bus, which a lot of people would like for you, sister. They think you should be punished and not praised. But what you've done is you've shown the laxness of the security at our nuclear weapons facilities, but you've also pointed out that we still have an out-of-control nuclear arms race with an out-of-control budget building more nuclear weapons in our own country. And for that, you should be praised, because that's ultimately what the Sermon on the Mount is all about. And I think, along with Sister Simone Campbell, speaking at the Democratic Convention about the Ryan budget, that you can't build more nuclear weapons and cut Medicaid and cut Pell Grants and cut Medicare at the same time. It's not just the arithmetic doesn't add up if you say you're balancing the budget, but the morality doesn't add up. It's just wrong. And so what you did, sister, was just so memorable to me in pulling up all of those classrooms that I was in for all of those years, just hearing that message. And so I thank you for that, and I hope that the members of this committee can learn from what you're saying and what Sister Campbell is saying, and perhaps just reflect that in the incredible commitment that too many members have to building more nuclear weapons when we don't have any targets anymore for those nuclear weapons. And some people just think of the defense budget as a jobs bill. No, it should just be what enhances our security. And if you can't justify it on that basis, you just can't maintain it because it adds to the instability on the planet. So, Mr. Poneman, let me just go to you. The United States Enrichment Corporation is possibly the most troubled company that has a pending loan guarantee application at the department. It is rated at below junk bond status. It has been warned that it is at risk of being delisted from the stock exchange, which prompted the USEC to warn its shareholders could be put into default on all of its debts. It lost more money last year than the entire Cylindra loan guarantee was worth, and despite repeated DOE bailouts totaling almost $1 billion and free uranium and other subsidies in just the past 8 months, the total value of the company is only about $62 million. And despite the clear signs of impending bankruptcy, the department requested another $100 million from Congress for USEC for fiscal year 2013. Mr. Poneman, will the department actually provide these funds to USEC even if USEC continues to be at risk of being delisted from the stock exchange and defaulting on all of its debts?
Congressman, let me be very clear. The thing that the United States Department of Energy is focused on is maintaining a domestic source of enriched uranium so that while we still have the deterrent that we need to defend America, we can get the tritium and so forth.
I understand that, but USEC's American Centrifuge Project in Ohio plans to use foreign-made technology for everything from pumps to cooling systems. They've even asked from Congress to pass legislation to get favorable tariff treatment on these imports, and USEC's Kentucky facility relies on French pumps to move the enriched uranium and waste through the machines. If DOE really believes it needs American technology to meet its tritium needs, why does it allow USEC to rely so heavily on foreign technology?
To be very clear, Congressman, that is, whether there are some parts that are foreign, the technology and the intellectual property is owned by the United States of America, and the United States Department of Energy has taken every step to ensure that in the event that USEC is not able to carry out its responsibilities, that we have access both to the machines and to the intellectual property to assure that our tritium requirements can still be met.
But are you going to give them money even if they're going bankrupt?
To me, to us, Congressman, the question is not a specific company and its status. The question is the capability for the nation. We will do what we need to do to make sure that we still have the deterrent that we need to defend America.
Well, I just disagree with that 100%. I just think if we're going to have a loan guarantee program and Cylindra is going to be criticized, then we have to criticize the United States Enrichment Corporation as well, and we should find a way indigenously of doing it, but not subsidizing companies that are going bankrupt. It's just wrong.
Congressman, to be very clear, precisely because the underwriting criteria of the loan program guarantee could not be met by USEC. The department entered into a far different arrangement, a much more modest arrangement for research, demonstration, and development program, which would vouchsafe the technology stayed safe in American hands, even if the loan guarantee could not be qualified, as under the underwriting criteria it could not. The program that we have in place will reduce the technical risk and reduce the financial risk if it works out, and we have very strong safeguards to make sure that the U.S. taxpayer interest is well protected.
Gentleman's time has
junk bond
expired.
status.
Gentleman's time has
The risk
expired.
is massive.
Gentleman from Virginia is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Back to the subject of this hearing. I got a couple of questions. I've heard that everybody's processing reports and going over all of this. Can I assume that you all will bring a report to us as well, highlighting what went wrong, what's being done to rectify that?
Congressman, we not only recognize, we embrace the oversight responsibilities of this subcommittee, and we will surely bring that to your attention.
And Mr. Chairman, I think probably before year's end, we might want to have a revisit on this subject, even if only a brief hearing on that matter. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Also, there's been talk of, and I don't care who responds, because several people have mentioned that there was the debate over federalization had been going on for years, and that it was being looked at again. And I'm sitting here, and there may be some great reason for it, but I'm new, and I'm just trying to solve problems. But have we ever thought about attaching, at least for the protection of the perimeter, an installation of the United States Army?
Congressman, the first thing that we have done in this particular instance is make sure, with the force that we have and the arrangements that we have, that we're safe and the material is secure. We have already said we need to look at exactly the kinds of questions you're asking to see if it can be done better. It's been looked at many times. I do think that Mr. Gaffigan put his finger on something very important when he said, whatever the organizational arrangements, and I think this is what the past GAO reports indicated, there is no substitute for strong management and oversight. So whether it's a federalized force or whether it's a contractor force, there is no substitute for getting that strong direction and leadership.
And historically, the United States Army seems to have done a pretty good job of that.
We're very proud of. Yes. We are very proud of the U.S. Army.
That being said, Mr. Friedman, I am new to this, but my understanding is that this has been going on for some time with various problems. And what else should we be doing as a committee to make sure that we don't have another problem 6 months, 2 years, 5 years from now? And as a part of that, should we be making more site visits to see whether or not the cameras are switched on ourselves?
Well, I'll respond to your question, Mr. Griffith, but it's a little presumptuous on my part to tell the subcommittee how to conduct its oversight.
Well,
but I would tell you this. I think periodic hearings on these specific matters would be worthwhile. I think more site visits, boots on the ground from the subcommittee's point of view to see what's going on, comparing and contrasting from your perspective what goes on at the various Department of Energy sites and seeing if there are anomalies that you might point out. And finally, sort of the $64 question, which I don't know has been asked, is the question of resources. And there are resource issues, and perhaps I know that you're an oversight committee, but obviously you have appropriations responsibilities as well, and that might be an area in which you could focus your attention. In other words, do they have the resources to do the job? Are they properly positioned to do that?
I would just add, Congressman, we would welcome any and all members of the subcommittee to the site. We think that'd be a very, very useful exercise and helpful.
All right. Mr. Chairman, I see no need to pile on. Everybody has said what happened was bad and we want to fix it, but I'm happy to yield my time to any member who might wish to have that time.
Okay, I'll take a little bit, and then the gentlelady from Tennessee. Mr. Freeman, you indicated more resources, but wasn't it a case where they just didn't check the circuit breakers on one of the cameras?
Well, I'm not suggesting that the congressional appropriation was inadequate. What I am suggesting is that in terms of the maintenance, which is one of the key issues here, we were told that there were not enough maintenance individuals to take care of the backlog of existing equipment while they implemented and installed the new system. So The pie simply was not large enough to take care of both. That's the sort of resource issue that I was referring to, and I apologize if I didn't make that clear.
But you'd admit that checking circuit breakers doesn't require more resources, and one of the key cameras no one checked the circuit breaker, it wasn't working.
Well, I would suggest to you, Mr. Chairman, that when somebody takes a closer look at it, it was more than a mere circuit breaker. But I'm not in a position to affirm that positively. But
Okay.
the
gentleman from Virginia reclaims his time.
Reclaiming my time, Mr. Chairman. I would say that the other question that I have is that there must have been more than just one or two cameras out. Either that or these folks had some inside information. My guess is that your entire perimeter was exposed, or else they wouldn't have been able to just waltz in the way they did. Either that or they knew which cameras weren't working. Sounds like to me the whole thing was down. And I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Scalise is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate you holding this hearing, and I have a number of questions, but I first want to respond to some of those comments made by the gentleman from Massachusetts. First of all, to try to equate in some way building nuclear weapons to protect this country and reforming Medicaid, which is an incredibly broken system that's depriving many people of good health care, and equating that as immoral. I have no idea what place that has in this debate. Maybe some people haven't been paying attention what's been going on in the world. I mean, we just saw yesterday on the 11th anniversary of September 11th that there's turmoil in this world, and especially in the Middle East. Not only what happened in Libya and Egypt yesterday, but also you look at what's happening in Iran. While some people here might want to eliminate our nuclear force and our capabilities to defend this country, Iran is currently developing and may have nuclear capabilities at this time. And there's a bipartisan group in Congress that recognize that threat. While President Obama might not have time to meet with Benjamin Netanyahu to talk about the threat to Israel, one of our greatest allies in the world, there's a bipartisan group in Congress who do recognize that threat and support the efforts not only of Israel to defend themselves, but of this country and the actions that we ought to be taking that we're not to address the threat of Iran, as well as the nuclear threats all around the world, and the fact that we can't do it by disarming ourselves. I mean, America is the beacon of the world in large part because of our strength, and peace through strength has worked over time. It's what ended the Cold War, and yet there are some people that want to think that now that the Cold War is over, they just want to kind of ignore history. And so, I think that history repeated itself yesterday, and those who ignore it are doomed to have it repeat itself, and we can't let that happen. And that's why the Department of Energy has a responsibility to protect the arsenal that we have. And and I think what our hearing is really focusing on is what kind of job is being done. I looked at the Inspector General report and have some questions about that. First, I want to just open it up to the whole panel. In February, the National Research Council issued a report which concluded in part, I quote, "The study committee recommends that the NNSA, Congress, and top management of the laboratories recognize that safety and security systems at the laboratories have been strengthened to the point where they no longer need special attention." This was written in February. I want to ask if any of y'all want to comment on that. And first of all, do you agree with it? I strongly disagree with that conclusion by the National Research Council. And I think what happened with this breach just 2 months ago shows that, in fact, they haven't been strengthened. But this conclusion said they are strengthened. I know, Mr. Congressman, you want to comment on that?
Very important points. And just briefly on your first point, that's exactly why President Obama has made clear that in our nuclear posture review that nonproliferation is the top objective, and we have bent every effort to stop Iran from obtaining nuclear weapons.
I would disagree. I would think if you look at the actions that this administration's taken, it's been inadequate to stop Iran from developing the capabilities that everybody that honestly looks at it, especially Israel, which is faced with evisceration, says that they're carrying forward with. So, I mean, to say that this administration has taken actions to stop Iran from advancing their nuclear capabilities is just wrong.
Sir, with all due respect, we have negotiated to curtail and to pull out highly enriched uranium or natural uranium that had been enriched at the Natanz facility. We are sparing no effort to stop that. But I want to go back to your NRC question about the report. We strongly, strongly believe that continued and, in fact, enhanced vigilance and oversight is required. The job of
So
security—
did you agree with that conclusion that security has been strengthened to the point where it no longer needs special attention. Do you agree with that conclusion, or do you not?
No, security always needs to be
Okay, so you
strengthened.
disagree with
Will
that.
never be
Mr.
done.
Friedman, you did the Inspector General, you're part of the Inspector General report. What's your response to the conclusion that they had just in February?
I disagree with that aspect of the conclusion. Based on our work, we treat these matters as on our management challenge list as components of the management challenge list. While there have been some improvements and some setbacks in certain areas, we don't think their position is.
Thank you. And I hope that the department looks closely at your report and some of the reports of those who were on the ground, those people that were tasked with maintaining security at this facility. I mean, it looked like a Keystone Cop operation where the officer there wasn't even paying attention to what was going on, wasn't even really securing the facility after the people who broke in came in essence surrendered to him. They just he just kind of looked around. It took a second supervisor to come before they finally took some action. But I think it shows, and he wasn't the only one. I mean, there's reports that people on at the facility for months didn't know even how many cameras weren't even working. They had no idea what was working, what wasn't working, and some of this had been problematic for months. And so I think there was a culture there, and I don't know if that permeated at the other facilities too, because Y-12 wasn't the only facility. So I don't know if this is a culture of neglect and lax security, but clearly there's a difference because, as I pointed out, you look at what National Research Council said. They said the security's fine, and it's not. And so I hope that there will be real accountability, and not just people reassigned, but people ought to be removed, and a new culture needs to be installed. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, gentlemen. I believe we've had a very good attendance by the subcommittee. I want to thank the witnesses for their patience and participation. I ask unanimous consent that the contents of the document binder be introduced into the record and to authorize staff to make any appropriate redactions. Without objection, so ordered. The documents will be entered into the record with any redactions that staff determines are appropriate. And I remind all members that at 12:30 we're going to have a meeting and a briefing, and all members on the subcommittee are invited. It's over in the Visitor Center, and you can talk to staff if you want the actual room number. And again, we want to thank our witnesses, and the subcommittee is adjourned.